Welcome back to The Uplink, the podcast where we bring you pro tips and creator tricks straight from the LINC community studio. I'm your host, Joshua. Today we're taking our local studio completely global. Today my guest is Professor Karen Barton from right down the street here at UNC and host of the Geographies of Hope podcast. Her show features some really incredible, uplifting stories of community and humanitarian efforts from all over the world, and she records it right here with us at LINC. Well, 99% of the time. Professor Barton, welcome to the studio. I'm so thrilled to have you here to kick things off. For anyone who hasn't tuned into your show yet, give us kind of a 30-second pitch. What is Geographies of Hope podcast?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Joshua. And thanks for helping me over these past 3 years with our podcast. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Geographies of Hope is really a podcast about stories of change makers around the globe. We started off as a community-based program looking at locals who are getting it right in the face of all this global uncertainty. But now I was adding it up this morning, I think we've been to 17 different countries remotely.
Wow, that's really awesome. I really do want to get a map in here so that we can start dropping some pins.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Well, your day job is studying the world and teaching, which is a very different vibe from sitting behind a broadcast microphone. What's the specific spark that made you decide a podcast was the right medium to share these stories?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's really about sound. I mean, so much of teaching is focused on the visual now, especially in geography, which is great to learn about natural hazards in West Africa or, cultural geography in the United States. But to get students to just listen it's been a game changer for me. And I do a lot of things like sound maps where I record sounds in the wild and then put them on a map. But I love the idea of appealing to people's auditory senses,
I think that's a really unique way of looking at it. And with that being said, teaching in a lecture hall is one thing. Talking into a mic with headphones is another thing. What's the funniest or most surprising hurdle that you've hit?
Yeah, so number one, editing. So when I first started off, I was super casual about it. It was kind of a one-take thing. And then the more you know, the more you know. So you start spending a lot more time on editing. And then I guess a funny thing is it's allergy season here in Colorado. So
very true.
Sometimes you don't know what to do if you have to cough and then you're dreading having to edit all of that out later on. So maybe those two things.
Those are both really good. With giving away... without giving away a whole episode, what's one of the most surprising or uplifting stories of human resilience that you've discovered so far on this show?
There are honestly just so many. I recently interviewed George Karunis, who is with Generation X. He's a Generation X, like myself. So we grew up around the same time period, and his inspiration, doing the things he's doing as a storm chaser, it's just so inspiring. But I think the one, and there's actually two others, and I'm only naming guys now, and I feel bad for not mentioning some of the women I've interviewed. But I recently interviewed Musa Saidi, who is he's a doctor of infectious diseases in West Africa and Senegal, and he was talking about Ebola, which is not necessarily an inspiring story. But at the end of the interview, he started talking about what he likes about the U.S. and how he really enjoys working with scientists in the U.S. and the freedom we have and the cultural diversity. And it was like somebody shining a light on the things that I've maybe failed to appreciate over time.
Isn't it funny how getting someone's outside perspective can sometimes kind of remind you of some of the things that we've forgotten?
Yeah.
I noticed that without going down too much of a rabbit hole here, I noticed that recently with the World Cup. Getting reactions from a lot of soccer players in the U.S., reacting to American life and American culture.
Yes. Isn't there one viral TikTok video of a guy walking through New York City or something and looking at the holes, the ground, what do you call those things? Those manholes where steam's coming up, and he's just in awe and wonder at everything about the United States.
Yeah, I think my favorite one was when there was a picture of a Buc-ee's, and it just had a caption that said, "This is a gas station."
Exactly. And then the other one, which I always talk about, is an interview I did with David Hulack, who's a professor he's a professor at UNC, and he talked about the importance of psychological safety, how to be in a place where you feel safe and comfortable to fully be yourself. And I think about that interview all of the time. It was so inspiring.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And I really did enjoy the other Storm Chaser episode too. I thought that one was amazing.
He's
He's
great.
just so articulate.
I'm super jealous of George now.
Well, you're dealing with stories from all over the planet, quite literally. But the actual production happens pretty much right here in Colorado, mostly here in Greeley. How does having this local community space at LINC help you bring those massive global stories to life?
Well, I mean, if I had the resources to do it, I would travel on site to do all of these interviews. That would be terrific, and I can't. But what LINC has done for me, and if anybody listening hasn't been down to this space, you got to come see it. It's allowed me to have access to this larger scale of the globe. I'm a geographer. I study scale and what that means, connections from the local to the global, and I'm living it. It's been so useful, and I'm grateful to Becky Safarick, formerly with the city, who actually told me about this space. I never would have known.
I'm so happy that word has gotten around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of humanitarian topics can get pretty heavy. Does coming into a creative, community-focused environment help you keep the focus on the positive, hopeful aspects of your research?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we've talked about everything from storms in West Africa to a couple of guys that ran across the United States. And so when I first started this, I was focused mostly on the positive stories. And to a certain extent, I don't think that was fair or realistic. And now I hear stories of people that are kind of telling both sides and looking wholly at a problem. So that doesn't really answer your question. But I guess my point is that I'm focused on the reality of it all, not just the positive, but also the real challenges that people are facing around the globe.
Well, and I like that there's that contrast there, because you can't, light doesn't mean much without the dark.
Exactly.
So having something to compare it to and contrast it with, I think, helps to put it in perspective for
exactly.
listeners. Every episode of the Uplink, we want to leave some advice for the next creator who walks through our doors. Your show relies heavily on getting people to open up. You talk to people doing incredible, sometimes very difficult work. What's your number one trick or tip for making a guest feel comfortable enough to truly share their story?
Well, it helps if you know the person, I would say. It also helps if you're yourself and you're genuine. My mom has this thing where people, everywhere she went in her life, they just talk to her, they tell her things. And I think I carried that with me too. And it's been a real asset where people are just comfortable sharing with me. They trust me, because sometimes they talk about very difficult things. And so I would say you just have to be yourself, and you have to be a really good listener. I mean, a deep listener. And then finally, sense of humor goes a very long way.
I love how universal that is.
Yeah.
Even people's apprehension about the thickness of their accent, or things like that. I've noticed as you've interviewed people have been challenges that you faced, where some people are even apprehensive to even do it because they're afraid.
Yeah, and I'm always saddened when I hear people afterwards say they haven't listened to the podcast yet because they don't like the sound of their own voice. I understand people not liking photos of themselves, but it makes me so sad when I feel that people don't like the sound of their own voice. It's a signature. I think voices are beautiful.
That's great. I think that's a good sentiment, and I think that's very true. And that kind of harkens back to your core mission of using sound to tell stories.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, if a library patron is listening right now and wants to start a podcast about their own neighborhood or local cause, what advice would you give them on how to actually track down those inspiring stories?
Okay. The first thing I would say is to lean into your existing networks. Maybe don't try to go for the most famous person in your network, but with somebody that you have a good rapport with that makes a good interview, or not even an interview, more of a conversation. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And then kind of as an ancillary to that, don't focus on how many hits or followers you're getting, which is what I tried to do early on. It doesn't matter. We're recording an acoustic record in time of what the United States and the rest of the world looks like right now, sounds like right now. And that's all that matters. And if it's good, it'll take off. And even if it's good, it might not. It doesn't matter. It's the experience of just listening to people.
I think that's such a great point. I think that in this day and age, we take so little time to listen.
Yeah.
We're always kind of poised to say what we have to say. And so I think that it's a good format to provide a place where we can just listen to one another.
Right, exactly.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to leave the audience with a final thought about your show. If a listener takes away just one feeling or action from listening to Geographies of Hope, what do you hope that it is?
Well, sorry, but I think there's two things. That number one is that if you listen to people deeply, you're going to hear a really good story. I can't think of any of these episodes where I haven't learned something. So I come home from the studio, I drive to Fort Collins, and I start telling my family what I learned. You're going to learn a lot. If you sit across the table from somebody virtually or face to face, you're going to learn a lot about what they think and value and what they believe. And there's something really important in that experience. It's been so rewarding, Joshua. I can't even tell you.
Oh, I'm so happy that we could facilitate that with you. Speaking of virtual things, before we kind of come to an end here, you are unique with your show in that you have a lot of asynchronous interviews. We do a lot of connecting the roadcaster to your laptop for Zoom meetings.
Mm-hmm, thank you.
And we've done a little bit of experimenting trying to do Bluetooth. That went, not so great. But we've learned our lessons. So with asynchronous, speaking of learning lessons, there we go.
That mic.
With the asynchronous interviews, what do you find is the biggest difference or hurdle between interviewing someone in person and doing it remotely?
It's so much more stressful when it's asynchronous because you never know if it's going to work. Like when I was talking to Dr. Moussa Seydi, the most famous doctor in all of Senegal, I couldn't figure out what was going on his end because it turns out he had his windows wide open and the wind was blowing in. It's really the sound quality or the Wi-Fi connection. And you never know where the connection's going to be good. I interviewed somebody in Alaska who was a colleague, and that connection was really hard. Remember that, Steve?
Yeah.
Volcano Steve? But then I interviewed somebody in Zimbabwe, and it was perfect. So it's always challenging to know what the connection's going to be like when it's asynchronous.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. Just the technical aspects of it, the nuts and bolts of doing things remotely makes things really difficult sometimes.
But the learning curve, sorry to interrupt you, is also amazing because then you're absorbing new information about how to do it better next time.
Absolutely. And, that's one of the large things that we serve here for as a public space is to help kind of pass the torch of that technical knowledge. And that's one of the purposes that this podcast is supposed to serve is kind of if you could tell the next person walking in here a couple of things, maybe the most important thing, what would you say is from a technical point of view, one of the most important things that you've learned in here that you would want to pass to someone new?
Yeah. Technical. I would say just slow down. If you slow down and you pay attention and check to make sure you've got everything lined up instead of trying to worry about what could go wrong or rush through an interview, you tend to be a little more mindful of how to run the technology. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, Professor Barton, it's been an absolute pleasure. Where can our listeners find your podcast? And do you have any upcoming UNC projects that you want to shout out?
Oh, thank you. So you can find us on Spotify. And then I'm hiring a high school assistant this summer. And he has been helping me with a lot of the audio materials. Like we're doing a lot of on-site interviews now, stuff like that, which is super cool. We have like omnidirectional mics and we have shotgun mics. I'm so excited about that. But so you can find us on Spotify for now, hopefully other platforms soon. I know not everybody likes Spotify. And then what I'm hoping to do is in a couple years, we'll release more of a Geography of Hope ecosystem. My son criticized me because I called it like a universe, like a Marvel universe. He's like, please don't do that. That's cringe. So I called it an ecosystem instead. And we'll create a book that summarizes all of these stories we've had because we have an acoustic record of the way people are thinking at this time in history. It's really exciting.
I think it's great. It's our own modern version of oral history.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and podcasts I think get a bad rap sometimes because people feel like they're a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
You know, and now that it's so accessible and that anyone can make one, I think sometimes people don't give it the value, assign it the value that I think it really has.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think there's an elitism to that. This idea that, if you don't have X number of followers, everybody has one, who gets to have one, who gets to speak. It doesn't matter. It does, as long as you're creating, you can be your own community artist.
I think that's so true, and I think that people sometimes forget too that podcasts and videography and things like that are creative works, just as much as weaving a rug or carving a wood carving.
Yeah.
But I think that's important to remember, and I'm glad that you bring light to that with your show.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all of your help over the years.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. A huge thank you to Professor Barton for stopping by today. And thank you all for listening to episode 2 of the Uplink. If you're feeling inspired to track down your own stories, you can reserve this very studio for yourself. Head on over to mylibrary.us/studio. And don't forget to subscribe to the Uplink. We'll catch you next time.